The nature of sin, but the character of the human will is of moment. Because if it is wrong, these motions of the soul will be wrong. But if it is right, they will be not merely blameless, but even praiseworthy. For the will is in them all, yea, none of them is anything else than will. But what are desire and joy but evolution of consent to the things we wish? And what are fear and sadness but evolution of aversion from the things we do not wish? But when consent takes the form of seeking to possess the things we wish, this is called desire. And when consent takes the form of enjoying the things we wish, this is called joy. In like manner, when we turn with aversion from that which we do not wish to happen, this volition is termed fear. And when we turn away from that which has happened against our will, this act of will is called sorrow. And generally, in respect of all that we seek or shun, a man's will is attracted or repelled, so it is changed and turned into these different affections. Wherefore, the man who lives according to God and not according to man ought to be a lover of good, and therefore a hater of evil. And since no one is evil by nature, but whoever is evil by vice, he who lives according to God ought to cherish towards evil men a perfect hatred, so that he shall neither hate the man because of his vice, nor love the vice because of the man, but hate the vice and love the man. For the vice being cursed, all that ought to be loved and nothing that ought to be hated will remain. But because God foresaw all things and was therefore not ignorant that man also would fall, we ought to consider this holy city in connection with what God foresaw and ordained, and not according to our own ideas, which do not embrace God's ordination. For man by his sin could not disturb the divine counsel, nor compel God to change what he had decreed. For God's foreknowledge had anticipated both. That is to say, both how evil the man whom he had created good should become, and what good he himself should even thus derive from him. For though God is said to change his determinations, so that in a topical sense the Holy Scripture says even that God repented, this is said with reference to man's expectation, or the order of natural causes, and not with reference to what which the Almighty had foreknown that he would do. Accordingly, God, as it is written, made man upright, and consequently with a good will. For he had not a good will, he could not have been upright. The good will, then, is the work of God, and God created him with it. But the first evil will, which preceded all men's evil acts, was rather a kind of falling away from the work of God to its own works than any positive work. And therefore the acts resulting were evil, not having God, but the will itself for their end, so that the will or the man himself, so far as his will is bad, was, as it were, the evil tree bringing forth evil fruit. Moreover, the bad will, though it be not in harmony with, but opposed to nature, inasmuch as it is a vice or blemish, yet it is true of it, as of all vice, that it cannot exist except in a nature, and only in a nature created out of nothing, and not in that which the Creator has begotten of himself, as he begot the Word, by whom all things were made. For though God formed man of the dust of the earth, yet the earth itself and every earthly material is absolutely created out of nothing. A man's soul too God created out of nothing, and joined to the body when he made a man. But evils are so thoroughly overcome by good that though they are permitted to exist for the sake of demonstrating how the most righteous foresight of God can make a good use even of them, yet good can exist without evil, and as in the true and supreme God himself, and as in every invisible and visible celestial creature that exists above this murky atmosphere. But evil cannot exist without good, because the natures in which evil exists, insofar as they are natures, are good. And evil is removed, not by removing any nature or part of a nature, which had been introduced by the evil, but by healing and correcting that which had been vitiated and depraved. The will, therefore, is then truly free when it is not the slave of vices and sins, which was it given, such was it given us by God. And this being lost by its own fault can only be restored by him who was able at first to give it, only by God. Our first parents fell into open disobedience because already they were secretly corrupted, for the evil act had never been done had not an evil will preceded it. And what is the origin of our evil will but pride? For pride is the beginning of sin. And what is pride but the craving for undue exaltation? And this is undue exaltation when the soul abandons him to whom it ought to cleave as its end, and becomes a kind of end of itself. This happens when it becomes its own satisfaction, and it does so when it falls away from that unchangeable good which ought to satisfy it more than itself. This falling away is spontaneous. For if the will had remained steadfast in the love of that higher and changeless good for which it was illumined to intelligence and kindled into love, it would not have turned away to find satisfaction in itself, and so become frigid and benignant. The woman would not have believed the serpent spoke the truth, nor would the man have preferred the request of his wife to the command of God, nor have supposed that it was a venial transgression to cleave to the partner of his life, even in a partnership of sin. The wicked deed, then, that is to say, the transgression of eating the forbidden fruit, was committed by persons who were already wicked. That evil fruit could be brought forth only by a corrupt tree. But that the tree was evil was not the result of nature, for certainly it could become so only by the vice of the will, and vice is contrary to nature. Now nature could not have been depraved by vice had it not been made out of nothing. Consequently, that it is a nature, this is because it is made by God. But that it falls away from him, this is because it is made out of nothing. But man did not so fall away as to become absolutely nothing, but being turned towards himself, his being became more contracted than it was then when he clave to him who supremely is. Accordingly, to exist in himself, that is, to be his own satisfaction after abandoning God, it is not quite to become a non-entity, but to approximate to that. And therefore, the Holy Scriptures designate the proud by another name, self-pleasers. For it is good to have the heart lifted up, yet not to one's self, for this is proud, but to the Lord, for this is obedient, and can be the act only of the humble. There is therefore something in humility which, strangely enough, exalts the heart, and something in pride which debases it. This seems, indeed, to be contradictory, that loftiness should debase and lowliness exalt. But pious humility enables us to submit to what is above us, and nothing is more exalted above us than God. And therefore, humility, by making us subject to God, exalts us. But pride, being a defect of nature, by the very act of refusing subjection and revolting from him who is supreme, falls to a low condition. And then comes to pass what is written, "Thou castedst them down when they lifted up themselves." For he does not say when they had been lifted up, as if first they were exalted and then afterwards cast down, but when they lifted up themselves, even then they were cast down. That is to say, the very lifting up was already a fall. And therefore it is that humility is specially recommended to the city of God as it sojourns in this world, and is specially exhibited in the city of God and the person of Christ its King. While the contrary vice of pride, according to the testimony of the sacred writings, specially rules his adversary the devil. And certainly This is the great difference which distinguishes the two cities of which we speak, the one being the society of the godly men, the other the ungodly, each associated with the angels that adhere for their party, and the one guided and fashioned by love of self, the other by love of God.